So a few months ago, I officially hit a personal net worth of $100,000. Now, at the time of me filming this video, I'm currently sitting at a net worth of $135,000, give or take whatever is happening in the market, which means that it's obviously grown by quite a bit over the past few months. Now, the way that it's broken down is I have $125,000 in investments, mainly in my TFSA. I have $10,000 in my high interest savings account and about $1,500 in my checking account. Now, in all honesty, I actually thought that I'd hit this personal milestone a lot sooner than this, simply just based on the sheer belief that I've had in myself. But I can't be mad at this given how far I've come. See, for me, whenever we're talking about money goals, I've always been one of those people who thought they'd reach success, so whatever that means for you individually, pretty quickly, which means that on my journey to hitting a $100,000 net worth and ideally more, at times I did things that were really good for future me, but absolutely sucked for present day me. And it's funny because me and Steph were watching this show called Dave not that long ago, where the main character Dave said something that we both thought was hilarious, but also applied to me. He was basically saying how for whatever reason, he just knew his entire life that he was going to be successful and create something impactful for basically like just absolutely no good or specific reason at all. He just believed in himself and eventually did. And that's how I feel about what we've been able to do with this channel. Obviously, me and Steph have been very intentional with everything that we've done. I actually think that's a very important thing to point out, even going back to us quitting our jobs to do this full time. But the impact itself comes from us genuinely wanting to be transparent because we know how much that helps. Anyways, 2 years ago, we shared a video where I broke down how I would be investing $20,000, which at the time was my literal life savings. I was fresh off of paying off my student loan debt, so this was like a really huge moment for me. But let me back up for a second because my story starts well before this, and by the way, so does yours. We all knew something about money before we even consciously knew that we knew something about money. And this goes back to how you grew up, the conversations that were being had around you or not being had around you. All of it shaped our perceptions on money. So in today's video, I wanna fill you guys in on how I was able to hit a $100,000 net worth, especially coming off of a pretty big debt load, and basically how my journey's been from the real beginning. Now, if I think back to the first time that I remember ever thinking about money, it probably would have been when my family first arrived in Canada. So for anyone who doesn't know or missed our past videos where I talked about my journey, I was actually born in Kenya and came here as a small kid. Now, I remember getting here to what was supposed to be this like really great place. And keep in mind that we're talking about the POV of a kid here, so you're pretty much excited about anything and everything. So we get here only to realize, like so many other families who migrate from their native land, that you're basically starting from scratch. So that means financial education, learning about the different resources, and more. For me specifically, this meant that for a period of time, apart from anything that was a necessity, there wasn't really gonna be any extra or random purchases for the kids, once again, because we were starting from scratch. Now, this makes sense to me now, and believe it or not, it actually made sense to me back then too, mainly because my parents told me why. It didn't make things suck any less, but I was at least able to put a reason behind what I felt was a really big change. Now, it also set the stage for what would be one of the best gifts my parents ever could have given me throughout my life, and that's financial transparency, but we'll get more into that in a second. So for me, my first lesson on money was one of not necessarily having a lot of money, and I came to that realization pretty early on. Now, I'll say that the good thing for me was that a lot of the kids that I was going to school with at the time didn't have a lot of money either. So apart from seeing some kids with, you know, expensive sneakers or something here and there, we were all pretty much in the same boat and living in the same community. And it's interesting because I feel like parents spend a lot of time trying to shield their kids, or really shield themselves by telling them as little as possible. But the reality is that as soon as you're old enough to go to school, you're learning things about yourself and other people, whether they like it or not. Not speaking to your kids makes it so that they have to infer for themselves or take merit in what other kids are telling them. Now that's more so me reflecting on the kid version of me, but as time went on and as I got older, so leading into my teenage years, I gained more and more independence. I got a paper route the first chance I got where I was making like $50 or $60 a month, which at the time felt like so much money to me. It also meant that I could buy myself certain things. So for example, a cool pair of sneakers at the beginning of every school year. And this was great because having a job was something that my parents encouraged me to do, and it really gave me a lot of pride and confidence in myself. Then eventually when I was old enough to get a real part-time job, I got one. That meant that I could now have and pay for a phone bill and also save some money on the side for nothing in particular at that time, but probably because of my parents, I knew that I should be doing that. So the next lesson that I learned indirectly was me going from thinking that I could buy whatever I wanted, which in hindsight is kind of hilarious when we think back to me having a $60 a month salary or a $60 a month pay, to me actually getting a part-time job where I made somewhere around $200 to $300 a month, and me going from being less so on spending to actually thinking about saving more so with a purpose. And by the way, that purpose was my university expenses that I knew were coming up soon. Now, all of that covers the earlier lessons in my journey, and they were mostly around saving money. Now, I will say that the overall realization that I had was that we all learn things not just by doing, but by also observing the results of what other people do. I was fortunate enough to come from a family, so my direct and my broader family, that was always open about things, so the good and the bad. And in my opinion, that's translated into me having a frame of reference of what I should or shouldn't do financially. And it's also given me the space to actually be curious about what I do and what other people do and whether it could be done differently or even better. Now, when it comes to investing, so a step beyond saving, I know that me and Steph talk all the time about the first time that we actually considered investing. See, for me, it was after I paid off my student loan debt, so when I was about 25 years old. But if we take it back a little further, my investing journey technically started well before that. I actually had mutual funds from the bank as soon as I turned 18, which is something that I haven't really gotten a chance to talk to you guys about in past videos. Basically, all that money that I've been saving up as a young kid or teenager, so let's say around $5,000, when I turned 18, I walked into the bank and I asked the financial advisor if they could hook me up with some investments, which was basically the extent of my knowledge at the time. My thoughts were, hey, I've heard probably from TV that you should invest your money. I didn't know how to do it, so the naive, or I guess the logical step for me to do at that time, was for me to walk into the bank and ask them for help. Well, they definitely helped me help them by setting me up with high fee mutual funds. And in hindsight, this might sound really unfortunate, but I guess this was just, a part of the journey of me learning more about money and building up my investing knowledge over time. Anyways, looking back now, I can see that I always knew that there was more to be done. And in the words of one of my favorite quotes, exposure leads to expansion. Being exposed to investing, even if it was through high fee mutual funds from the bank, was the initial step that I had to take in order to get exposure or experience with investing. And honestly, this would later allow me to question whether or not what I was doing was actually right. Now, this is something that hopefully none of you have to do, given the fact that you're tapped into our content. Now, growing up, my parents never really talked about investing in the stock market, mainly because they didn't have the knowledge at the time. I'm not sure whether or not they knew that their pensions at work were being invested in the stock market, which may or may not have changed their outlook. Probably not, because their employers were handling it. And similar to having your money with a financial advisor, we tend to assume that everything is all good to go if we don't have to deal with it ourselves. Kind of out of sight, out of mind. But to me, there definitely was a fear from not knowing. I think for them, the idea of losing your money that you would work so hard to get, or even seeing the value of your money go down even for a short period of time, was just a really big no-no for them. As a side note, what I find really interesting when it comes to investing is how whenever you hear traditional media or traditional financial professionals, so we're talking financial advisors or news media personalities, for whatever reason, they have a really hard time explaining two very simple concepts. The first is that your money is going to remain invested even when you retire. So for a lot of people, that means that your money is going to be invested for pretty much your entire life, which is a good thing. And the second is that the market trends upward over time. So even if your portfolio goes down in value, as long as you don't have any immediate plans for that money, you should be good to go long term, as long as you're investing in passive funds that track the market. Now, if we get back to me, I would say that I definitely hit my stride maybe a year after I started to take investing seriously. Basically, if we fast forward to me at 25, so pretty much right after I finished paying off my student loan debt, I was overconfident and felt like I had to have a very elaborate or complicated investment portfolio. It's funny because this is also the kind of thing that fools you whenever you go to the bank for investing help. For some reason, we feel like complicated is better, and the less we understand about our money, the higher the likelihood that whatever is being done with our money will result in something good. We've seen this firsthand, where someone walks into a bank and says, I don't know anything. You're the professional, you tell me. Anyways, it took me about a year of learning myself to really get into the mindset of a simple investor. I basically just decided to throw out all of the unnecessary out of the window and really focus on what's important, which was creating and sticking to a plan and portfolio that I could manage over a long period of time. So a simple one. What's interesting is that if we go back to one of the first things I said in this video on how I thought that I'd hit that $100,000 milestone a lot sooner, is that a lot of us, especially in our 20s, tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in a decade, mainly because our frame of reference is skewed for a number of reasons. For some people, their mentality is that the gap between decades, so in this case 20 and 30, is huge. So they feel like they have all the time in the world to hit their goals, or they feel like they can take on and accomplish so much more within that time. So they're overestimating, or they're taking on more than they can actually handle. Keep in mind that a lot of this is also happening in the backdrop of the social media era. And this doesn't only apply to just the younger generation. Everyone is on social media these days. So even if you're not someone who actively consumes content from social media, you are still being bombarded with posts from people who are either your age or even younger that seem to have it all figured out. It's kind of like when we share some of our other net worth update videos. Every now and then we'll get a comment from someone that says, "Really? You know, I know people who hit that milestone 5+ years before you did that." Or on the flip side, there's people who feel like they're really behind despite taking that initial step of actually seeking out this type of content. The reality is that we're all on a journey and no two journeys will ever be the same, and that's okay. As I reflect on me hitting a personal net worth of $100,000, I'm just super happy and proud that I've been able to invest as much as I have, given just how far I've come. And, you know, in general, I know that little me looking at me now is super proud, and I know that future me will be even happier. If you guys have any questions on the specifics of my journey, you can go back and watch some of our previous videos. But if you're interested in taking the next step, then you should definitely sign up for Simple Investing for Canadians. It's our investing course that we made for anyone who's tired of doing things alone, or ideally wants to make their investing life a lot simpler with a plan that actually works. With that, we'll see you guys next week with another video. And if you guys have any thoughts or comments, I know I would love to hear how your journey, your personal money journey is going. Make sure you drop them down below.